And here we are, another data day for you. Guess what? We got more carriers leaving the industry. What does that mean for the situational turnaround in today's logistics environment? More to come. And here we go for another data day. Got to say a shout out to my friends at SendSpark for sending me some cool swag. Got myself a purple SendSpark t-shirt. Didn't realize how nice purple is on me. Geez, that sounded pretty arrogant. Hey, Dean, I was like looking in the mirror going, yes, sir. We're ready to go, man. Yeah. Diener, how are you today, brother?
Yeah, I'm good. Good to be back. First day back after vacation.
Oh, good for you. Yes, you were up in Lake Tahoe.
Yep.
And how was that?
No snow.
I know.
There's a bit of snow up on the top, but they had we've talked about had 73 feet last winter, but nothing so far, nothing to speak of. I mean, they've got some snow up on top. A few of the trails are open, but nothing compared to last year. So, and beautiful sunny days, like 40-degree days at Lake Tahoe, just spectacular weather. But for people, so Dan, things were that bad in the week between Christmas and New Year. They had to lay off staff because there were no people skiing, and so they had not enough traffic to open bars and things like that.
Well, I follow this guy, Muskoka Freerider, and he's a snowmobiler that goes to Revelstoke, BC. Every year, and he's typically gone like first week, second week of December. And in his videos in the parking lot, where normally right now there's like 3 feet of snow, is gravel.
Wow.
And like he's literally showing as he's going up the mountain, like he would stop and say, okay, guys, so just to give you reference, last year this area had like 4 feet of snow, and literally you see the grass.
Wow.
Like it's way, I mean, it's crazy. We some friends of mine and I had a trip scheduled, actually leaving today to go to Cochrane. So Cochrane is like level with Rouyn-Noranda up like from the Quebec level. So from my area, which is an hour and 20 minutes north of Toronto, it's about an 8.5-hour drive north, straight north. Right. So you're up there. I mean, you're north of Thunder Bay. You're up there. It's on the east side of Ontario, so it's not by Manitoba. But anyways, nonetheless, they don't even have snow.
Really?
And just to give you an idea, Cochrane is where polar bears live. So to give everybody an idea of how far north that bad boy is, it's north. Like It is crazy how this El Nino, is it El Nino or El Nina this year?
El Nino. Yeah.
El Nino. Yeah. It's crazy what it's doing. I mean, we sat here, we got maybe not even an inch of snow on the ground. I can still see the grass coming through, and it's beginning of January, where normally there's not quite enough snow around our parts at this time to ride normally, like the snowmobile normally, but there's a good base.
Right.
Like we're talking 40, 50 centimeters of snow we still need in order to do some serious riding. So we're talking a good 24 to 30 inches.
Jeez.
Easily before we'd be able to ride. So when is that coming? Lord knows. We typically have a January thaw, but even my daughter on ski hills out here, they produce snow, and then we were like 9-10 degrees, raining, pouring rain, killed all the snow on the hills. The hills shut down, and now I think they're just starting to reopen. But crazy winter, Dean. Crazy.
At some point you get to it and you think we're not going to get too much snow at all. Although we had a big snow forecast here in New England this weekend, so.
Yeah, I think we've got some coming this weekend too. But you know what? Hey, weathermen the meteorologists are the only ones that are wrong every day and get to still keep their jobs, brother. I'm telling you, I might go back to school. You know what I'm saying? If I can wake up in the morning and throw darts and say, that's what it looks like today, and then give the report and be wrong and be like, hey, I was wrong and nothing happened to me. That's a good job.
Well, that's a perfect segue to our talk today, because our ratecast forecasts were spot on. So where we said rates would be at the end of December, at the start of December, almost exactly where we said they'd be, which is
beautiful.
Not surprising, but I think I'm always surprised by how accurate rate forecasting can be. But then when you think about it, there's a lot of seasonality in the freight market, and so rates tend to behave fairly predictably when things are normal. So,
Yes.
if you think back to our show over the last 3 years, like there's been some wild times where rates have defied all logic. But this year, I think refrigerated shippers and brokers might have found it the hardest in the last week or so, because rates went up. Rates went up about 26 cents a mile in December, which is what we forecast, but they went up 19 cents a mile in that last week.
And that's for reefer and dry?
Just reefer, just refrigerated. And when I look at, and I said, so that's interesting. So that tells me refrigerated capacity was fairly tight. And of course, we've all got to eat and drink. So you see a lot of demand for refrigerated produce and food and bev. A lot of live load, live unload, right? So it's not typically a drop trailer scenario. So capacity is a little bit different. But when I looked at the USDA data across their 20 produce growing regions, 3/4 of the regions showed a slight shortage of trucks. Now, compared to this time last year, out of the 20 regions, there were only 2 regions this time last year that had a shortage of trucks. So most of the produce regions struggled to find capacity in the lead up to Christmas, much more so than the year prior. So it kind of tells me in a way that capacity is a bit tighter in the refrigerated market, which, based on my way of looking at the market, it's a more specialized part of the industry. The equipment costs more. You've got to have newer equipment. Some brokers require 3 years or newer refrigerated motors, right, on your trailers. So it's not like a cheap and nasty dry van. It's a specialized bit of equipment, a lot of live load, live unload. So I think it's, if you think about the carriers that are left in the produce market, I think in the reefer market are the more specialized ones that have been here a little bit longer. And I think that could be interesting to track as we go over the course of the next few months. Unlike dry van rates, which are already forecast to drop fairly significantly in the next couple of weeks, and it's worth talking about that, because rates ended the year at about $1.75 a mile excluding fuel, right? So about $2.10 a mile including fuel. And so remember, our forecasts have been pretty accurate, right, in terms of where we said they'd be. If we forecast them to be $1.75 at the end of the year, by this time in February, we're forecasting them to drop 20 cents a mile.
Holy crap.
So
now what does that put you on from a typical operating ratio?
So I could probably do this on the fly, because operating costs ended the year at $1.80 a mile. So if I quickly go in, if I say diesel's at $3.88, so diesel's been fairly flat for a month.
Yes. It's been fairly flat for a while, actually, hasn't it? Like I've noticed gas prices anyways dropping continuously.
Yeah. If let's say, if I quickly do the math, it's going to drop 20 cents a mile. If I put rates at $1.90, including fuel, my operating costs, my profit margin will go from making 3 cents a mile to losing 14 cents a mile gross profit.
Yeah.
So the impact
is going to drop 20, right?
Yeah. So the 20, if line haul rates dropped in the spot market in dry van 20 cents a mile over the course of the next month, that would take carriers from a just barely break even scenario. These are long haul spot market carriers, right? So not your large fleet. You would go from about $1.80 a mile. Your operating cost, your profitability would go back to levels we haven't seen in the last 5 or 6 years. It'd be that bad. Because diesel,
which brings us to kind of the next point, is we're going to have more and more suppliers drop out of this. For sure.
I think so, Dan. We kind of we didn't forecast that. We talked about it being sort of the worst case scenario was that we get into January and the rate of exits out of the industry start to accelerate. And I honestly thought we'd see fewer carriers leave the industry in December because it's a better month from a rate perspective. We saw 1,000 more carriers leave in December. I thought it'd be the other way, but we saw 1,000 more carriers revoke their authorities in December than November. In DAT's network, on our subscription network, we saw more carriers leaving the industry. So I think you know, the fact that rates didn't go up as much as they would normally do in a tight market, because it's such a soft market and there was just a lot of capacity. I think a lot of carriers just bailed. It's the end of the year too, Dan. Like, you've got a lot of things fall due on 12/31. You've got, you know, your quarterly tax payments. You've got a lot of things that creep up on you towards the year end. And I think that tells me that we continue to lose capacity out of the market. We're still jettisoning capacity in the spot market. Rates have, I can't say that rates have, you know, started to turn positive, because they haven't. They're still bottoming out. And probably if demand doesn't pick up, you could it's almost obvious that we're going to see more carriers leave the industry in that spot market side of the industry.
For sure. And I would think also a lot of, you know, for the suppliers that were kind of hanging on for Christmas, to get that last kind of hurrah before, I mean, I would think, and again, I could be totally wrong if anybody's out there is listening or watching that's on this plane of understanding. You know, they held out for Christmas to maybe collect some of the higher revenue, but they were probably going to leave in January anyways.
Right. So that'll be interesting to track, Dan, is which way this is going to go, because I think the data point that I've been watching is the number of new carriers entering the market is back to pretty much where it would be long term. So, like, I find that particularly interesting, is the number of carriers. You know, if you go back and look at pre-pandemic days, we always saw new carriers come in, but we saw a lot more new carriers come in the last couple of years. I think that's starting to slow right down. Obviously, the industry is less attractive. We're seeing fewer carriers join the market. So 2024 looks, for all intents and purposes, a very normal freight year. I think the pandemic influence of the last 3 years has worked its way out of the market pretty much. Like, in terms of the volatility, we're still seeing some carriers exiting the market. But if rates fall 20 cents a mile on the dry van side and diesel sort of remains where it is, that's going to really put the pressure on a lot of carriers in the first quarter, because it's going to take a little while for demand to pick up. I think that's so we are back to, I think, you know, my prediction for this year is a fairly normal, seasonally driven freight market, you know, absent a global catastrophe or some sort of incredible geopolitical risk related activity. You know, even with demand down and ships having to go around the Cape of Good Hope to bypass the Suez Canal, and all the Houthi rebels attacking, you know, commercial container ships, forcing them to run an extra 12 days around the bottom of the South American continent. The African continent. Even with that, I don't know that will cause too much of a problem. It's not like it's not on the same level, I don't think, yet as the, you know, Panama Canal, you know, drought restrictions on capacity. So even with that, it would take a massive, you know, infrastructure attack on our, you know, oil producing fields in the Middle East, for example, that would move the needle substantially on diesel prices.
Yes,
that would then impact carriers. So I guess I'm sort of, you know, talking about possible scenarios, but I think if rates continue to fall, as they are most likely going to do for the next few weeks, certainly, it gets us to the end of this quarter, which will be a pretty rough quarter, I think, for a lot of small carriers, even if diesel remains flat.
Yeah, and if diesel doesn't remain flat, then it'll be just a bloodbath all over the place.
Yeah.
But, you know, also, Dean, on the flip side, right, we've talked about this many, many times. And on the flip side, I do believe we have to go through these cleansings. I think as an industry, and you know, excuse my ignorance, trucking is the only industry I've ever known. You know, through this industry, I think the cleansing is very important. You know, we had a lot of people come in, and again, we can look at this from so many angles, right? I look at it from the value angle, like who's giving the value, who's providing value to the end customer to help them achieve their goals. That's the way I look at everything in this industry. And I also find that a lot of suppliers that came in during the pandemic were coming in for one reason, which was money.
Right.
And I believe if money is the end all of end all and only thing you focus on, it doesn't allow you to make the right decisions that are beneficial to your clients, right? Like if DAT just focused on money instead of providing valuable data, sure, you'd get clients because you're focusing on the money, but the the longevity of those clients would be slim to none.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Dan,
and I think this is where I think we're going to lose a lot of those suppliers that don't have that end goal of their customers in mind.
Yeah.
And I'm good with that. Now, some people might say no, because there will be suppliers out there that are good, but they just don't understand their costs, or they're living outside their means from a corporate perspective. And people that use them and need them, they're going to go away. And then there's going to be, you know what I mean? So there's going to be, I think, both levels to it.
Well, I think, Dan, I think if you're in the broking business buying capacity, I think you're going to find a lot less capacity for that final, that last rush load.
Yes.
Right. Because I think that's where we're headed, right? We may not be there yet, but we're definitely heading in that direction where there's fewer carriers going to be around in the market, certainly in the next quarter, to operate in the spot market. And there's a few things that are driving that. I talked to a large carrier this morning. A lot more of their customers are working with their asset light division. So a lot more shippers are working with brokers for low volume lanes, which we've talked about on the show before.
Yep.
So shippers are definitely locking in capacity on high volume lanes, but looking to work with brokers on low volume lanes. So I think that's where there's a sales opportunity going forward. But in terms of buying capacity in that area, you're going to have to build really good partnerships and make sure those carriers are around to do that. Because I think you talk about capacity exiting. This is a fairly normal market behavior where capacity exits after what we've been through. It's taken a lot longer for that capacity to exit. And I'll put some numbers around this just so everybody understands. If I say 2023 was a break-even year, where for the average carrier, they broke even in 2023, they made the equivalent of $4,000 profit in the first half, lost $4,000 profit in the second half. These are all costs included based on rate per mile. So it was a break-even year, which again, you might say, well, that's okay, right? And it is, but you paid yourself a wage, but you're not generating much profit. You're not generating any profit essentially to pay for major breakdowns. So, and most carriers will tell you that to make money and be in business, rates need to be around $250 a mile to make money and survive in trucking long term. They're at about $210 right now. So rates are nowhere near where it is for carriers to survive long term. So let me put a break-even year in context. 2018, they made $34,000 a year gross profit after all expenses. 2019, they lost $2,000 a year gross profit. The pandemic, 2021, they made $100,000 a year gross profit. And 2023, break even. So when you look, so you go, 2018 was a reasonably good year. 2019 was a bad year. But then the pandemic area where they made upwards of $1 per mile gross profit, that allowed a lot of carriers to pay off debt and hang in this industry a lot longer. That's why capacity is exiting much slower than what we thought, right? So that gets us to the end of 2023. And I think what we're seeing now in our rate forecasts is a significant decline in rates. This is normal. This shouldn't surprise anybody that spot rates drop. But I think relative to where operating costs are, which are higher than where they've ever been before because of the inflation impacts, we're going to see margins get compressed. And the only carriers that are going to be able to survive will be those that have very low debt levels in their business. Because based on my modeling, if the average is $1.80 a mile, a carrier that owns everything outright, an independent contractor, can run for about $1.50 a mile and still get by. We're not generating enough profit to, put money away for a rainy day or pay for an in-frame rebuild for $30,000 or anything like that. The carriers are still very vulnerable at that level. But I think the idea that shippers have talked about is that they're acutely aware that when the market turns, there'll be far fewer carriers available to haul freight in this market cycle. And again, our best estimate is that'll be the spring before we start to see any material impact on both demand and spot rates.
I mean, if you look at that though, from again, typical is a relative word, I think, depending on what year you talk about. But
Right.
January and February are usually the slowest months in freight, anyways.
Right.
And so the way I look at it is, I say, let's look at the positive side of it. It's an extra 4 weeks.
Right.
Of what would normally be a slow season. Now, again, you have a bunch of variables like never selling during the pandemic, using load boards as your salespeople
Right.
during the pandemic, which then turned into load boards in the non-pandemic time, which turned into cheap freight, which turned into, I'm seeing a lot more posts about brokers canceling on carriers and, at the last minute, and carriers are saying it's because you're making more money with somebody else. And,
Right.
and then there's the back and forth with carriers canceling on brokers at the last minute, and there's, with all this back and forth, it's, I think, again, we're losing the, how do we help each other succeed and make things work? Like, realistically, it's, 12 weeks, call it, before spring, right?
Yep.
And if things are going to start turning in spring, how do we collaborate together in order to get through the tough times?
Yeah.
And I think we're missing that again. Like, and it's typical though, right, Dean? Like, we see it all the time in markets like this. It goes back to that cutthroat that I have to survive. And in order for me to survive, I don't care who goes under in order for me to survive, where it's the exact opposite thinking. Like we get into this reverse thinking in times like this, which is just so crazy because we've been through it time and time and time again. We know what happens in the end. In the end, the market turns and then everybody starts going, oh, we're making money again, right? It's like this.
Well, Dan, I think that's like here we said at the start of January. If you said, what's the one thing that's going to happen this year? You're going to have, reliable carriers to move freight in the spot market. And there's going to be far fewer of them. And I think they have pretty good memories. I think, they will remember how poorly they were treated in 2023. So I think I always find it a really dangerous game where, brokers play that game with carriers and force rates down. I get the whole idea of expanding margins and making profit. I'm not against anybody making profit, but at some point you've got to say, I've got to work with carriers, leave a bit on the table for them so that they can survive. And maybe that's ridiculous thinking. Maybe that's not how the market works. Maybe what actually happens is you drive the market down, carriers leave, then a whole lot of new carriers come back in. And it's a bit like, shitty customer service in New York City. Service could care less because there's another million people coming in tomorrow.
Yes, exactly. Well, it's interesting. Over the past couple of weeks, obviously in preparation for the new year, in preparation for my relationships, in preparation to make sure, I've been talking to all of my customers, right? Like, when I share these strategies, it's not just talk, I actually do it. And in conversation with my customers, I mean, 99% of them are like, oh no, we're expecting January to be totally dead and things start picking up in February.
Right.
And, then immediately taking those conversations and going back to our suppliers and to my team and saying, hey guys, can we please relay this information to our suppliers about what's happening and when we can expect? And not only that, ask them what their plans are.
Right.
Like, because I want to make sure, A, when our customers come back online, that we're ready. And B, we're ready with the same suppliers that delivered remarkable service to start.
Right.
Because for a customer to come back online, right? And this is the way I look at it. And I suggest every sales rep out there listening to this takes this information in and uses it. Like, when a customer is slow and then they come back online, the last thing they want are service failures because you're using somebody new, or you're trying to build a different, or hey, my supplier that I used had to find other business. They got to do what they got to do. So we're already starting the conversation a month earlier than we're expecting freight to say, hey, listen, this is what we're looking at. Kind of What's your process? How are you getting down there? What kind of volumes do you have? What do you project by month end? I mean, and again, projections are projections, that things have to fall into place for these projections to become solidified and become reality, right? But being prepared. So, I had yesterday about an hour conversation with one of my customers, and I kind of went through the process and said, okay, so we're, our supplier is about 2/3 of the business to maybe half the business than they had before.
Right.
So this supplier, I'll be able to handle X based on their projections come month end. What I would like to do is I'd like to sit down at the third week of January towards the middle of the third week, and I'll give you an update on that.
Right.
And the customer was so appreciative because they're like, oh, thank you. We're reaching out to everybody and we're trying to find who's going to have this capacity, because when things turn, they don't want these price hikes from what they used to have. But they also, more importantly, that Joe was telling me, he goes, I need the volumes. Like, I need the trucks, because we now, and for everybody watching and listening, like, we got to think about this on multiple levels, right?
Right.
And it's the customer's customer. It's the end user, right? I know I've waited a long time for certain things to come in. And so when they're in, you kind of want them right away.
Right.
Because you've waited already, right? So then to deal with these service failures and all this other stuff, I think it's a disservice to your clients if you don't do that work ahead of time.
Right. Dan, I think I was just listening to you talk about that, because this is like the key, because I can guarantee you in 4 months' time, we'll be having the discussion about where did all the trucks go and how do we move this freight, and why didn't anybody tell us about this? I think the discussion now has to be, the storm is coming, make sure your roof is in good shape, because I think shippers on the large contract volume side are acutely aware that there will be capacity tightness and rates will start to turn up. They've locked in capacity on high volume lanes. They are clearly working with brokers on low volume lanes. And I think that's where your capacity acute shortages will manifest. And maybe that's the time for great margin expansion, because that to me seems inevitable, right? If capacity exits and you've got a demand increase, then that means opportunity, I think, for a lot of carriers and brokers in particular. But I think that the important point, we've still got to watch for demand, right? That's the wild card. The market has never historically turned because capacity has exited the market. It's always the demand side that turns the market around. And we're just not seeing any signals yet that are, going to change anything beyond seasonality, which again brings us to the start of produce season, the spring. People dig holes, planting season, people move machinery. Things warm up, people start building things. But as Jason Miller said on our show in the last week, interest rates are going to be the big determining factor.
That's what I was just about to say.
And he doesn't see that happening till June. So, our best industry experts are sort of saying that we've gone from the second quarter being a really good indicator to maybe the second half of the year being when things pick up. I'm not an economist to any degree that could be any more certain than someone like Jason Miller or Lee Klaskow on Bloomberg Intelligence, or our own Professor Chris Kaplas on our DAT data scientists. They all think that it's certainly towards the middle of the year before things pick up. But to where we talked about at the start of the show, I think refrigerator capacity will be very different though, Dan. I think because of the expensive nature, higher insurance costs for cargo, more live load, unload, I think you're going to see more capacity tightness in reefer than dry van in particular.
I see that, because you got to think, if you're trying to refinance or if you're trying to purchase new reefers in today's day, the interest rate is so different than it was a year ago, year and a half ago. And it's just like houses, right? You look at how many housing projects have ceased to continue.
Right.
All across, I could speak for Canada, all across Canada. When I was out in BC last month and a half ago, I was speaking to a regional developer out there, and he was like, oh no, we've pretty much halted all building, because right now to pay taxes on the land is one thing, but then you start putting up homes that nobody's buying because the interest rates are out of whack. He goes like, no, we just pause it. And I'm looking at some subdivisions being built around me,
Right.
2 in our neighboring town and 1 in our town, and pretty big. I mean, there's 790 homes in one, and there's 2 with over 600 homes. So, you're well into the 2,600 home range. You look at that where it's like, holy crap, that's a ton of families. That's a ton of housing.
Yeah.
All of it's just stagnant. And
Yep.
it has nothing to do with winter. It's all about the interest rates, because right now they're paying minimal on bare land. You start constructing buildings and roads and all this, it becomes a lot of money for these developers to put out, and nobody's buying.
Right.
There's homes on my street. I don't know what it's like around you, but homes on my street have been up forever. And normally they're gone within 2-3 days. Like, and it's not when the market was hot or anything, just in this area alone. Homes just seem to go very quickly, and now they're on the market forever. So, you look at that and you start saying that there's a lot of things that need to shift in order for that need to come back for the capacity.
Yeah, I read something very interesting Jason Miller had on his LinkedIn post that, he was sort of saying that the big inventory buildup that we had to work through they're showing signs that it's nearing the end for more than, for most people. So I think that's what I'm watching for, is if that's the case. We still end the year pretty strong when it comes to import levels. So, Dan, this just looks like shaping up as a fairly normal freight market year, which means fairly boring, right? So that not a lot of volatility, very similar to prior freight market years. You could even go back 10 years to what looked like in 2013, 2014 as being fairly representative of what this year could look like, barring any major upheavals. So and I think it's going to be strange if that happens, right? Because I think a lot of us have got used to volatility. We've got used to uncertainty in the market,
used to the intensity and the chaos during the day, and things changing in 3 seconds, where it used to be. I mean, I in the years I've been in this, the decades I've been in this industry, the last couple of years have been the most kind of eye-opening for me ever. And I think, again, we needed it. I think shippers needed it. I think brokers need it. I think carriers need it. I think everybody needs it, because I think at certain points, every industry needs, for lack of a better term, Dean, a shakeup. Right. It needs people to realize, okay, what's the volatility in this, and how can we, we get so accustomed and used to the same old, and then things change. It's like, what just happened there?
Right.
And I think that's what happened in the market. And I think it was good. I think we're on the verge of something really cool this year. I'm liking what's happening. I'm liking the fact that you need to be a salesman now. And you need to show, like, it's not as easy as just picking up the phone and you got business, because if you had trucks, you have business, right? Like, it's now it's education. That's skill development. It's talent development. It's team development. It's culture development. It's all these different things that are now going to be the moving and shaking factors in companies.
So, Dan, this is really important, because I think the overall freight pie certainly has shrunk in the last year, total tonnage, more like what it was in maybe 2018, 2019 in terms of total tonnage, to give you sort of a guide.
But which is normal. COVID wasn't normal, Dean.
But the percentage of the pie that's going to spot for brokers is less. Right. So that
in spot, yes, but a lot of brokers have contracts.
Right.
So there's one thing I think that COVID did, was it also switched a lot of shippers' mentalities, that brokers don't just get what's left over. It's like, you can handle, like, I could do this. I can handle it for you. And I see with the people I'm speaking to and the companies I work with, like, I'm seeing brokers get more opportunity for massive amounts of business than I ever have seen before.
Right. So, Dan, that's exactly right. That's where the opportunity is this year. Because if you go back to 2019, we saw on average about 10% of our contract volume go to spot. It's stuck at about 16% most of last year. So that could be a couple of things. It could be shippers playing the spot market and putting more to spot, yes. But when we talk to shippers, it was also more the strategic buy on the spot market through their brokers of what would normally be contract freight that would go out to tender and then be set up for a rejection. So I think the data point that supports this and why there's opportunity out there, even though the slice of the pie that spot is sort of, is shrinking as the whole market shrinks. The data point I watch is the tender acceptance rate. What's the rate of carriers accepting the tenders that come out through EDI for contract loads? It's still high 90s, like 95%, 96%. So that tells me that, of course, most of the loads that carriers are getting, they're accepting, which means there's less falling through routing guides out into the spot market. So it's a different market this year where it's going to be really important to have relationships. I think there's still opportunity, but the discussion with shippers has to be, this market's going to turn and capacity will tighten. We need to be locking in capacity on those low volume lanes now as much as you can, with carriers that run predictable patterns. And I'll sort of close this thought with one of the things a broker was asking me last week was, well, how do I find capacity in this market? And I said, well, you don't look in this market for capacity. You look for where the capacity needs to go to. So if you want to get a load to Saskatchewan, right, and you're in Philadelphia, you don't look for trucks in Philadelphia. You've got to look for carriers in Saskatchewan to say, how do I get you back home? And that's a much different discussion around building relationships and understanding lane density and where you've got to move those loads to maintain your margins.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Makes sense. It's going to be interesting moving forward, and I'm looking forward to the next couple of weeks because I think it's really going to shape out the next 2 months.
Yeah.
Know, kind of what happens, what we see. So we had, if we do some quick math here quickly before we get going, we're talking October, November, December. We're talking close to 6,000 carriers exiting the market more than have come in.
Yes.
If I remember the stats that we've been, maybe September, October, November, December, maybe the last 4 months. I recall triple digit 2,000 something September, 2,000 something October.
Yep.
So maybe close to 7,000 then.
I can do the numbers really quickly, Dan. I can tell you we've lost... we've had 118,000 join in the last year. 144 have left. So 144 minus 118. So the net is 26,000 still. So we had 144 leave in the last year. We've had 118,000 join. So you're right. We've had, it's been averaging around 2,500 carriers a month have been more, decreasing capacity. The net.
Yeah. And as we talked about, a lot of those, some of those, not a lot, it'd be interesting to see what the ratio would be, have gone more specialized, more tooled carriers that have come in, right? Like you were talking about your friend that used to do line haul and now he does auto hauling, so that obviously won't help capacity in an FAK market. It's a more specialized market, right?
Yeah, Dan, I spent the last week hanging around truck stops in California and Nevada, and it's small data sampling, right? It's one person out there watching, but if you've been watching it for 20 years, you see the pattern start to develop. And one place I watch is this Petro truck stop on I-80, because it's the first big stop you hit before you go over the Donner Pass into Sacramento. And it's sort of that long haul lane from, you come across from Chicago through Nebraska, Lincoln, North Platte, through Wyoming and into there. It's a kind of a place where you pull up to, fuel up and rest and, check everything before you start that big decline from the top of Donner Pass down into the foothills. And it was empty last week, like empty. Other than the trucks that live in the area that park over on the sides, every time I go there in the middle of the year, like when it's busy, it's wall-to-wall trucks, like just full. And this year, though, it was empty. And it was.
Is that because of the Christmas holidays, though?
So it's partly, but it's also because it's so quiet. Freight volumes was sort of quiet, but it was also because a lot of carriers take time off. But it just struck me compared to last year, and I don't have the numbers, like was it 60% less or more? I don't know. But it was just, when I take the pulse of the industry, there was a lot it seemed like there was a lot less capacity moving around last week compared to the prior year, which has to be the case because we've got, 144,000 carriers have left the industry, the long haul sector in the last year. That has to be part of the equation, is you've got less long haul capacity. And for the 126,000 that's come back in, they aren't going back into long haul necessarily. So that's where I think you're seeing this capacity shift in the market to where the demand is.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. All right, my friends. Thank you so much for joining us, Dean, my man. Thank you. Jeff was going to be on today. Yeah. He's had some technical issues. So Jeff, we missed you today, brother. Looking forward to having you back next week. Yeah. Anything coming up in the next week, Dean, that you want to shout out to? Are you still you're on vacation, right? You're heading on vacation. So.
I'll be working, but I'll be down under, so I'll be upside down on our show next week. I'll literally
mate.
Right. So
that's not a knife. This is a knife.
Yeah, so that's not a triple. This is a triple.
That's right.
our triple road trains are like hundreds.
Oh, I thought you meant a triple drink.
No.
Okay. Got it. Well, maybe you can share. Maybe you can take some video and share some Australian information with us next week.
Dan, why don't we do that in the context of why don't we have longer, heavier trucks and trailers on some of the best roads in the country? Because in Australia we run B triples, which are I don't know how I describe it, but it's like 150,000 pound combinations on the same roads that we would run an 18-wheeler at 80,000 pounds. So I'm going to do the math on the productivity difference between Australia and the US in terms of ton hauled per linear feet of truck length. Okay. And I think you'll be staggered at, because we run some of the biggest trucks and trailers in the world in Australia. And we could share some of that video because I just think it's an interesting comparison, because our roads are worse. Here it's much better. We've also got Jim Blaze on our show next Tuesday, the DATI.
Oh, really?
Show. Jim Blaze is on. We've had him on here. He's a railroad economist and an expert. We're talking about...
Jim's awesome. We had him on with you.
Yeah, we're going to talk about short-haul intermodal and can it compete with truckload? Because it owns the long-haul space. When you get over 1,500 miles, long-haul intermodal owns that space. But there are some lanes where geography plays a part, as Jim explained on our recent show here. So we've got him on next week. Don't miss that. And
beautiful. And that's on Tuesdays, everybody, on the DAT network.
Yep.
Definitely. All right, my man. Well, we will see you next week, and we will chat during the week. Have a safe trip down under, and we'll chat then. Okay. Everybody, keep watching. Tomorrow we got an amazing show, and then of course book Club Friday with When They Say No by Richard Fenton and Andrea Waltz. We'll see y'all tomorrow.